Well, hello, hello. Here we are. This is episode 16 of Struck Live. I cannot believe it's been 16 episodes, but here we are. And as you know, this is all about Struck, the upcoming series. And so we are here today. I am so pumped because I have an opportunity to talk to Dr. Tim Clarey. Dr. Tim has done incredible research. And you know, those, I guess, history shows that you see and all these archaeological discoveries of how they discovered uh, the Dead Sea Scrolls and the House of David and all these wonderful things in Jerusalem. And it just is so fascinating to see how archaeology and whether it's some sort of artifact or something that happens in the earth that's uncovered, it's so incredible to see how it underlines and proves that the word of God is real and the word of God is true. And I simply just love that. It fascinates me. But today we're going to be talking to Dr. Tim Clarey, and Tim has done some mammoth research. I think over 10 years of research through ICR, and he has uncovered some things that prove there was a worldwide Genesis flood. So we're going to talk about that today. I am more than pumped about that, and I want to bring you guys into the discussion. So make sure you comment. Make sure you ask questions. If there's something you don't understand, I'm going to have Dr. Tim on. So I want you to ask him questions directly. We'll post it up on the screen and we'll have him answer that directly. I love that we're doing that. I love that this discussion is going to be live and it's all going to be here. So at your fingertips. So if you have questions about some of the discoveries and some of the research, please, let's get that answered today with Dr. Tim. I want to show you real briefly a little bit about ICR, a little bit about Dr. Tim and what they're doing there. So hold on one second for this video. We'll get that up.
The book of Genesis talks about a global flood. But most of the evolutionary community and most of the scientists in the world say there never was a global flood. It was all maybe just a local flood at best. Maybe just flooded the Middle East. But what really happened? Was this flood real? Is there evidence for this flood? People ask me all the time, where's the evidence of a global flood? And I tell people, just look down. Most people are staying on a location on the earth where there's thousands of feet of flood deposited sediments filled with millions and billions of fossils. But why do people say there was just a local flood or there was no flood at all? Because those people are coming from an evolutionary worldview where they don't want to believe there ever was a flood. They don't want to believe God's word talks about a global flood in the book of Genesis. When you look at the layers, it can either be thousands of feet of sediment deposited over millions of years or thousands of feet of sediment deposited in the year of the flood. It can't be both. I spent the last 10 years at ICR compiling data across 6 continents of the world. And all those continents show the same pattern of a progressive flood. Every continent has the same order of burial, same sort of fossils at the same time. As the water went higher and higher, we see more and more coverage. And ultimately, we see a peak of the flood all at the same time all over the world. How do you explain that unless it's a global flood? Join me as we examine the rocks across the world that confirm that God's word is true.
Wow. Okay. So exciting. I cannot wait to talk to Dr. Tim. Well, okay. So hold on. We've got a lot to cover in the short 1 hour that we've got. I also want to talk about, we had an incredible time at NRB last month, and we had the Swimma Hour of Power. And in that time period, we were able to play our trailer for Struck the series. and ladies signed up to be a member of the Lightning Club. Let me tell you a little bit more about that. The Lightning Club is an incredible, um, you're involved when you sign up for the Lightning Club. You get the lightning bolt, and that comes once a month. And this is like all of the latest updates, the latest news of the series. So when you sign up for the Lightning Club, you get the lightning bolt once a month, and it's all the news and data that's coming out about the series before we release it to the public. So you want to make sure that you sign up for the lightning bolt. So there was about, I don't know, several women that were there at this event, and they all signed up. Well, today we're going to announce the winner of the prize. It's $100 worth of Struck merchandise. And so the Struck gear, you can see that on our site. You can see some of the items. I mean, there's hats, there's jewelry, there's t-shirts, there's mugs, water bottles, there's all kinds of things on there. But you can find all of that on our site, and that is at strucktheseries.com. So when you go there, you can purchase merchandise, you can give it as gifts. They're really great. They really make a statement of faith, but they also, it's kind of like it's our theme for Struck the Series, because two men were struck by God, right? One was struck by God to build the ark, and the other, Dr. John Morris, was struck by God to find evidence of the ark and a global flood. And we're going to talk about that more today, but you can purchase some of this merchandise there at strucktheseries.com, and every proceed goes to Struck. I mean, we got to pay for the merchandise, of course, but any profit goes to developing Struck the Series. So not only are you making a statement of faith when you're wearing a t-shirt, a cap, a mug that says Struck by God, but you're also helping us get this incredible truth and flood the world with truth through this entertainment series that we're doing on both Noah and Dr. John Morris. So make sure you do that. Make sure you go to the website and check out that. It's very important. We want you guys to see that. And then let me tell you a little bit about Struck. If you don't know, Struck is based on the courageous true life story of Dr. John Morris. He searched for the evidence of creation in a worldwide flood. He performed, I want to say he went to Mount Ararat about 12 to 13 different expeditions. He did a lot of research, but he was struck by God, honestly, to prove that the word of God is true. And Dalton Morris was married to John, and Dalton, she may be on today. I hope she is. But we still have Dalton with us today, and she is an advisor for Struck the Series, which is incredible because she was right there with John. A lot of times she went with John on several trips, and she was always there during his incredible search for the ark. But throughout the day today, or throughout our program, we're going to refer to the comments. So if you've got something to say, if you've got a question, again, let us know what that is, and we'll try to get to you. We've got Cindy Navarro on. Cindy says, looking forward to this. I am too, Cindy. I'm really looking forward to talking to Dr. Tim. And we got Sharon on. Hey, Sharon. Hey, cuz. It's good to see you. Glad to see you that you're on. We're going to have just whenever you've got a question, please post it, comment live, either on Facebook or YouTube, wherever you're at, comment, and we'll make sure that we get it posted and we get that question answered. But basically what's happening here is our series is going to cover these fascinating two of the most fascinating men with the story of Noah, the biblically sound story of Noah, not the one with rock monsters, and also John Morris, who searched for the ark. So we're going to cover that in this incredible series. I'm so excited. I'm so excited that I'm part of this series. But listen, make sure you go by, sign up for the Lightning Club so you can be a part of this incredible series. Now, you can see here that this story is not going to be your average drama. It's going to have, we call it an epic adventure, just because it's going to have lots of things. And it's going to be 3 to 5 seasons. It's going to be 8 episodes per season, but we're going to cover John's life. We're going to cover Noah's life. A lot of the things that you are just not used to seeing are some of the things you didn't know about Noah. There's not a lot in the Bible about Noah, but I like how Wes, our director, says, he says that the stones are the scripture and the mortar are the stories in between. And what's so great about that is we're going to cover all of that. So we're going to see Noah like you've never seen him before. And we're going to be true to the story itself that's in the Bible. So we're not going to, we're not going to go stray far from that. But we've got Wes on, actually, and Wes says, finally, I've been trying to get on for the last 10 minutes. Okay, well, it's good. I'm glad you're here, Wes. So appreciate that. And let's see, we've got Crystal on. Oh, yeah. Okay, so Crystal's with Swimma. Yes, she talks about how the Power Hour was amazing. Excited about the Struck series. Thank you so much, Crystal, for that. And it's so great that you guys had a chance to experience that. We had such a great response at the Swimma event. So thank you so much, Crystal. Appreciate that. Okay, well, without further ado, I want to talk a little bit about this incredible guest that I have today. Let me share with you just kind of a visual, so you kind of get we're talking about the proof, right? The proof is in the pudding. Today we're going to have the pudding. So I'm more excited about talking about this than I think anything that we've discussed before on the show. But Dr. Tim Clarey earned his master's degree in geology and hydrology and his PhD in geology. He worked as an exploration geologist at Chevron and was a professor for 17 years. Clarey has authored several books and multiple papers, including the book Dinosaurs, Marvels of God's Design, and Carved in Stone, Geological Evidence of the Worldwide Flood, contributing significantly to geology and creation science. He is currently the Director of Research at ICR, the Institute for Creation Research in Dallas. So there you go. Okay, so welcome to the stage here. If I get him here.
At ICR.
Hold on. I told you I might have a little bit of technical difficulties, but there we go, Dr. Tim. There you are.
Sorry about that.
You're back.
I was trying to shut my email off and I ended up shutting the whole thing off by accident. So
I wonder where you went.
hopefully it didn't take too long.
No, you're good. This is live, so things happen.
I know.
Yeah, it's not.
I'm used to that kind of stuff. So anyway, it's a pleasure to be here. Sorry about that technical difficulty.
No problem. No, we're glad you're here. I'm so glad. I cannot wait, honestly, to talk about this today. Okay. And I've got so much ground to cover. We don't have a lot of time, so I want to kind of get to it as soon as I can. So can you tell us a little bit more about ICR? There's a 50-year legacy here of ICR. And I know that Henry Morris started ICR 50 years ago, but it's so much. I had the opportunity to walk through the halls, to go through the interactive museum there and actually just and talk with you, particularly about some of the research, but tell the audience a little bit more about what ICR is all about.
Okay, well, the Institute for Creation Research is kind of the name that Henry Morris came up with back in 1970. So he wrote his book. He and John Whitcomb wrote a book, The Genesis Flood, that came out in 1961. And that kind of reinvigorated the idea that there is evidence maybe of a global flood. And they talked about from the theological side and the geological side. And he was kind of an engineer himself and had a lot of geology training, but he showed to people like myself when I was a student, this is very few books out there that actually showed there was evidence for the flood. And so he started this organization trying to bring in people, and they actually had classes. They taught graduate classes in California, in the San Diego area for many, many years. Then they moved here to Dallas about 15 years ago and reestablished, ICR in the Dallas region with a museum called the Discovery Center, and has a planetarium. And you're seeing pictures kind of going by the screen right now on that. So it's right here on the edge of Dallas, the northwest edge of Dallas. And it's been open since the museum's been open since 2019, but with COVID, it had some issues. But it's a spectacular display of the evidence for the flood, the evidence of the ice age after the flood, and all these different dioramas. It's, I think we spend it's just amazing. It's not huge, but it's big enough.
It really is. It's phenomenal because you get to interact with some of the displays. And I saw several schools that would come in and they would go through the museum, and it's such a learning experience. As a tactile learning. You're seeing, I mean, the T-Rex there was robo animatronics. So you're seeing it move, and there's motion, there's sound, and they can actually just get their hands into the soil. It's just so wonderful.
And there's a little display of the Ark too. So kind of just
yes,
you walk through, you kind of get the idea of a couple of levels and the animals in the Ark. And so it's got a little bit of everything. It really does. A lot of the videos that we put together to show things. There's a lot of 7-minute videos that are really outstanding, almost as good as anything you see at any museum in the world, including Disney. And some of the rocks that were carved here, our Grand Canyon display, for example, was carved by the same guys that carve rocks for Disney and other places around the world. So they're very realistic.
Yeah, it looks so great, and you go through it, and every section is different, and you learn a little bit more as you're going through the museum. And I just really highly recommend, if you have not gone, if you haven't been to ICR, you need to go experience it. It's phenomenal. Like you said, there's a planetarium as well. There's incredible exhibits, but you actually step into, there's a miniature of the Ark, so you kind of see how it was probably built and how all the cages were set up for the animals. But then you get to walk into kind of this recreation. You're like walking down the hall, the galley of the Ark. It's really, truly amazing.
We have a little office for Noah, even so. Your character could have played.
Yes,
and with some tools in there. The Bible talks about how they use metals and things, so they might have even had more sophisticated tools than we even show in our exhibit. We don't really know. That's one thing the Bible is very quiet about, is between the creation, then you get all the way to the flood, all the way to Noah. It's about 1,600 years of missing time, really, when God doesn't tell us a whole lot about it. But he does say that the world got more and more wicked, and that humans were always getting, more and more wicked as they progressed along. And that's why the flood was a judgment for that human wickedness.
I think that there was more technology, or I guess knowledge, than we give that the pre-flood world credit for, just because I mean, he had to build the Ark, and that was a tremendous undertaking.
You see it. They estimate that might have taken 80 years to build the Ark or something. People have come up with numbers, but to build something like that out of wood, and then one thing that people kind of misinterpret is that word pitch, that he covered it with pitch. But really, it's the Hebrew word kofir, which just means a covering, a kind of an expensive covering, maybe. And so it's a different word than is used later when he's talking about what I think is real oil at the Tower of Babel. They mixed it in their mortar after the flood. So I think the oil even came from the flood, and he used maybe some sort of tree resin as that covering, not really an oil product. But it's an amazing bit of technology, and we find that there was distillation going on. People are cooking things. Even some of the Neanderthals were found a year or so ago to be actually distilling things underground to make a stronger, almost like a glue to glue their stone tools under their wood spear points and things like that. So there was a lot of technology that was passed down by word of mouth even after the flood. And as humans dispersed around the world, that's why we see Dr. John used to point out all the time, we see the same type of step pyramids all over the world.
It's amazing how that's true. You see the same kind of architecture throughout the world at different time periods. but after the flood. And one of the things that I found, so because I'm an artist, I found so fascinating at the museum is that you have a lot of these reliefs that show dinosaurs along with people, and that people were either the pre-flood world or the after the flood. They were still etching these large mammoth animals, and a lot of art that's out there that shows that dinosaurs, I mean, we do have footprints next to dinosaur prints, we know that, but there's also a lot of reliefs that I didn't realize that are out there that show dinosaurs next to humans, and humans hunting dinosaurs and that sort of thing.
Right, and that's some of those legends about, humans killing dragons. We're probably killing dinosaurs after the flood. So the dinosaurs, they aren't listed in the Bible because the Bible wasn't translated. It was translated 200 and some years. I forget the number exactly. I have to do the math. Over 200 years before the word dinosaur was even invented. So the King James came out in 1611. You didn't get your word dinosaur until 1841. And so they talk about dragons in the Bible and beasts of the earth. But God didn't exclude anything on the ark. He brought 2 at least of every kind onto the ark. So he would have brought dinosaurs on as well. Probably small ones, and there aren't as many as the perception is out there. There's probably only 60 or 70 kinds. So you wouldn't to bring that many on. So plenty of room on the ark for all the dinosaurs, the animals.
And, the Bible talks about Leviathan as well. But talk a little bit about Dr. Tim, about the research side. The museum is incredible, and you guys have got to go see it. But talk about this incredible team of geologists and researchers that work for ICR.
Well, we've got quite a team. We've got 6 people really working. They're doing research on our science staff right now. Many of them have PhDs in genetics and PhDs in biology, and several in biology. One in paleobiology, paleobiochemistry. Which really he deals with the original tissues. And we also have scientists working on cavefish, blind cavefish, to see how they lost their sight, how does that work, and looking at the integral things through microscopes, as you see here. They can actually look at the different stages day to day as these animals develop from the egg. How do they lose their sight? Why do they lose their sight? And we're wondering if we can actually bring that back. If we, over certain generations, can we quickly go through what we believe are not just random mutations. We believe these are pre-programmed adaptations. And so our new theory of biological design that we're working on with our biology staff and with Dr. Galuza, our president of ICR, we're working on this whole new theory. We're throwing natural selection out. We don't believe nature can select anything, that it's all pre-programmed in the animals. And so these DNA will switch on and off and grow hair to make a mammoth, maybe a woolly mammoth from a regular elephant. Because they sense the cold weather, and over a couple of generations, maybe, we don't know how many, suddenly these animals got bigger, they got more hair to survive in these colder environments. The same thing is true as animals filled the earth after the flood. Some of them went to deserts, other regions. They had to be able to adapt rapidly into these different conditions. Even the finches, for example, with different beaks that Darwin talked about, those all happened very, very quickly. Within a couple of generations, their beaks changed to modify to what they're eating. But they're still the same finches. A lot of them are the same species. And so the blind cavefish and the fish that swimming outside the caves that aren't blind, they're the same species, same DNA. It's just some of the switches go on and off. So we're really excited about that. We're trying to put a whole new theory of biological design, where we see the creation, the design by the Lord Jesus as part of the Trinity, of course, that made not only the earth, but he also made all these animals, the amazing DNA in you and I and all the animals and plants of the world. And so that's one thing. But and then, kind of coming full circle back to where I'm working in geology, we've been working on since Dr. John and I overlapped for about the first 4 or 5 years I was at ICR. He was a great mentor to me. He's the one that kind of got me going on this whole idea of these mega sequences and mapping out the rock layers around the world, looking at these oil well columns and things, and actually and putting this data. So he was really the guy that really instrumental in getting me hired, not only bringing me to ICR, but also he saw kind of the potential that, he was getting older. He needs someone to come in. And now I'm at that point where I'm getting older, and I'm kind of bringing new people in to replace me as well. But I'll be here, hopefully, God willing, a few more years. But there's still a lot of things to do. And it's just amazing. And this is exactly what Henry Morris envisioned, I think, for ICR. An institute where we're actually doing research, real, empirical, repeatable, observational research.
It's so fascinating what you guys are doing over there. And, one of the things, and I'll talk about it later, that we want to incorporate is back to the science, where we are incorporating science into the actual episodes. And I find it so fascinating that people really don't understand that there is proof behind the flood, just like the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered, and I love it that it's in stone. I think that's interesting, that it's permanently in stone. The proof is in the stone, and that the Bible says, if you do not praise me, the stones will cry out, and the stones are crying out. I just think that is just so wonderful. But okay, well, you talk about Henry Morrison. There he is on the screen. I'm sorry, Dr. John Morris. You talk about Henry Morris, his father, who started ICR, and then John. Of course, our stories about John and how he was struck by God to find all this evidence. So a lot of the research that he did, you kind of took up the gauntlet, and you said that he was a mentor to you. Do you have a chance to work with him very much?
Well, I did for about 4 or 5 years. We overlapped, and I'd come in and he'd say, "Here, read these papers," and I would go back and read them. And when I first got to ICR, I didn't really have a lot of research going, and I was trying to figure out what exactly we're doing. I knew we wanted to look at the geologic columns across the United States and kind of see how that ties together the western side of the U.S. to the east, because nobody's making comparisons of the rocks across the whole United States. It hasn't been done in probably, I don't know, maybe decades and decades by anybody. And then let alone nobody that I know of is actually looking at every continent of the world like we've been doing the last 10, 12 years now. And it's a slow, methodical process, because a lot of times science takes a long time.
Yeah.
And then we do other things here at ICR. We're always putting out our Action Facts magazine, which comes out free. Since Henry Morris started ICR back in 1970, we've been putting out Action Facts. And so the little newsletter, we do it about 8 times a year now, as opposed to every month. But we're also speaking. We go out and do a lot of talks at churches that invite us in to speak at and show people. We don't try to argue with people. We just try to say, look, here's what the evidence shows.
Right.
And we may not use the word proof, because you're looking at historical things that happened in the past, but there's pretty compelling and strong evidence that there was a global flood. The research that I'm showing shows the same thing on every continent in the same general order, and nobody's done this. And even the evolutionary scientists who've read my book, Carved in Stone, they said, well, Tim, we like your data, because the data is real. It's the real oil well data and column data. Just spend the time to compile it all and put it all together and compare it to the surface maps and get really accurate data as much as we can. They love my data, but they say we don't like your interpretation, because they're still stuck in the mindset of millions and billions of years. And so they just imagine that anything could happen quickly, but they realize the data is real. The rocks are still there. They still show.
Yes.
Today, what happened?
It's all there. And I want to get into your research and exactly how you do that research and what your findings have uncovered, because I think people will be so enamored by the results and the discoveries that you've made. So I want to give people kind of access to some of the visuals here. So hold on a second, Dr. Tim. I want to come back to you, but I want to show them this quick video.
At ICR, we do big picture, big impact research. One of those projects is one I'm involved in, called the Column Project. What it involves is we compile geological data, sedimentology data really, of all the rocks all over the world. And up to this point, we've got nearly 6 continents completed. And what that entails is kind of shown here. Each one of these represents a column that shows all the different rock layers, how many feet of sandstone, limestone, shale, in different locations around the world. And this represents the same rocks that we're seeing in 3 different parts of the world. So this represents one from Syria, this one represents one from China, this one represents one from the United States. So there are places in the world where we see the same rocks in the same order, in the same essential pattern all over the world. Up until we started this research, nobody knew that the rocks were so consistent around the world, that we do see the same order of flooding. And so what we interpret this as is the progression of the flood. As the rocks started to flood the land, we see every continent starts to flood very slowly at first, and just a little bit floods. Then we see later all the continents of the world flood a little bit more, until eventually they reach a common high point on almost every continent at the same time. It's truly strong evidence of a global flood when you see all the continents doing essentially the same thing at the same time. There's really no other logical explanation. And so we think this really confirms the global flood, this research that we're doing. It's continuing. I've been working on this for over 10 years. I have a colleague who helps me with the maps and generating things that we can show to people when we go out to churches and speak. And it's the supporters of ICR that allow me to do this research, that allow us to do this column project, those of us involved in it. We really appreciate that our salaries are paid so we can do the research to show that God's word is true. I tell people all the time, I get the best job in the world because I get to really show people that God's word is true. How can you beat that? And so the research we're doing, again, really does, I think, help edify the church, helps edify, I think, the supporters of ICR by doing these column research, showing that the same thing is happening on every continent pretty much at the same time, all over the world. We really are showing that the rocks really do cry out, that they really do show that there was a global flood.
Well, okay. So I would love to hear a little bit more about the research. You've been doing this for over 10 years, and you have gone to 6 now of all kind of, or did you do a 7th?
Well, I finished 6. I just finished 6. And so I just finished Australia, New Zealand, and some of the areas, Papua New Guinea in that area. So that's all in. Some of the maps I know that we showed today may not include those, but they're in the database now as well. So we can compile this big global database. We've got to do a little bit around Antarctica yet. And so there's still some rocks exposed around there that I want to do.
Okay.
But I got to, most of Antarctica is covered with thick ice, and so you can't really project underneath there too well. But for completeness sake, I at least want to, put in what we do know. And so what it really entails is I have to go on the computer. And this probably couldn't have been done 20 years ago because it's a lot of data is out there. Oil companies who, like I used to work for when I worked for Chevron, they would publish papers sometimes or do PowerPoints at a lot of their present conferences and things, bragging about the discoveries they made. So after they discover it and secure the land, get all the leases, and they can brag about it a little bit, what we found. And so they'll put these wells out there that are offshore now in over 10,000 feet of water in different places like that. Data that was never available. But it's all available if you kind of data mine on the computer. And so that takes a lot of work to gather the data, and then I have to compile it all, get the right thicknesses, pick the boundaries of the different, sequences. We'll talk about these mega sequences. And then I have to put all that in this database, and then I have to compare it to the surface maps and so you have 3D control into the ground. And I try to get as much data from the surface all the way down to the crust, all the way down to the granites and the igneous and metamorphic rocks, which is really the crust of the earth. So you get the complete package. And in most cases, I was able to get that. Some places it's not available. There's nobody drilled down deep enough. Like in Egypt, nobody really knows it's way down there. They kind of stop at the oil well pay zones, and nobody knows. So there's a few places where I had to interpolate in, but for the most part, the data is, pardon the pun, rock solid. I mean, it's the data that anybody could find, but it's a lot of work.
This is when you're saying core drill. This is what the oil companies use to drill for oil. It goes all the way down into the earth, and they pull up samples of these layers that are underneath us that we can't see. One of the things I found fascinating was at the museum, they kind of show the Grand Canyon, and that's where you can see those layers visually. You can see them. They're up, and you see those different colorations that are different layers. But you're saying with your research, you went all around the world at different 6 of the continents, and you have found the same data on every continent.
Essentially the same order of rocks. And sometimes you'll be missing some of these layers in between. Sometimes there wasn't deposition everywhere at the same time. Other times, even the flood layers were coming in and going back. And so there's some erosion in between. But for the most part, you can take what you see at Grand Canyon, and you can extend that across the United States, and you can extend that across the world from continent to continent. So these flat layers that we can't see, they're underneath their feet, they're still there. And so those
Yes.
layers continue, so you can see the same sandstone across almost the entire United States at the same time, which is maybe only 100 foot thick at the thickest. How do you get a blanket sand, they call it, or that, and that same sandstone goes across North Africa, and it goes across the Middle East. It's Petra, Jordan. It's the same sandstone there as in the bottom of Grand Canyon.
Well, I want to talk about your book.
Mhm.
When you and I met, I guess it was about a year ago,
Mhm.
and you had this. You just released your book, Carved in Stone, and it really, it was so funny because you talked about it, and then you handed it to me, and I was like, oh wow, this is a heavy. It was like a school textbook, humongous. There's so much data in here, and I encourage anyone to purchase this book because it goes into all the details of your research, and there's a lot of graphs in there, lots of information. But you had done this. I think you released it in 2023, right?
2020, right? It's the month everything got shut down. And so
Okay.
it shows the first three continents, but really it establishes the patterns. And those are the same patterns I saw on the other three continents when I got those done. And so this book is not out of date. It just doesn't have 6 continents, it has 3 continents, but it shows the same patterns. And there really is this compelling evidence of the worldwide flood. So this map shows like the high point of the flood. So you see little dots, little blue dots way up there in Hudson Bay in Canada, which I kind of consider as the bathtub ring, I call it. Because you don't see coverage everywhere. There's a lot of erosion after the flood. And some of these areas didn't flood very deep. The Bible talks about 15 cubits or 23, 25 feet of water is all that went over the highest hills. But they were zipping across like tsunami waves do and stripped like areas like Canada and Brazil, India, the Scandinavia area. All those areas were stripped right down to the crust. And so whatever was there is totally stripped down right down. But there's a few little remnants up there.
Do you believe that the land mass was all one mass, and when the flood happened, things shifted and everything pulled apart? Is that when that happened?
Yes, we kind of believe there was a pre-world Pangea type of world, which we modified a bit from maybe the evolutionary one based on our research. We made a few tweaks here and there. But overall, we believe there was kind of a Pangea world with a massive, particularly the southern continental masses all put together, including Antarctica. You kind of see it here. There's 2 big areas of land, and some of this gets stretched by the projection. But the area in the south down there, that's Africa and South America to the left, and Antarctica and India and stuff to the right. North America is kind of in the center there a little bit. But you see the bright green is where the highest ground, and the darker green is the lowland areas where most of the dinosaurs are found all over the world in these same type of areas. And then the light blue is kind of a shallow sea. And so I believe these areas where we just see marine fossils that were buried, possibly the earliest part of the flood was just, as the water went higher, it started to flood different environments. It's a progressive flood, which is one thing that Henry Morris never really knew when he wrote his book in 1961. He didn't understand plate tectonics either, because that wasn't even on the table. But we believe it was a period of rapid, what we call catastrophic plate tectonics, that the fountains of the deep burst open, cracking open these plates all over, then the plates started to move. Maybe that's by a miracle of God to begin it all. But once they started to move, of course, you get rid of original ocean crust and you create new ocean crust. And that's what we see in the world today, as we can actually see that pattern. So we see this progression in the middle there, that curve. The sea level goes up a little bit you start at the bottom in the Sauk mega sequence, they call it the Cambrian. You see it goes up a little bit and comes down and goes up and down. As it moves to the left, in this case, it's going actually higher. And so you see it peaks up there at the top of what's called the Zuni, right around the end of the Cretaceous. And that was that map we showed earlier that has a little bit of the bathtub ring, and then it goes down. And this is drawn exactly from my maps, from looking at 5 and now 6 continents of the world. This is kind of a diagram.
So this represents the layers that are
the layers that were deposited, if they were deposited, if you had them all. And in those 3 little diagrams, those 3 little columns I showed in my little interview earlier, those are 3 areas where you have all 6 of these sequences. So a mega sequence is fairly a new term in the secular geological literature, established in the 60s, really by a scientist named Lawrence Sloss. And he realized that instead of all these different geologic systems and names like Cambrian, Ordovician, Historian, you can actually lump them into 6 major floods, 6 major flooding events that went onto the earth and backed off a little bit. And then the next one came on and backed off. And the next one came on and backed off, each time leaving a huge package of sediment that's fairly consistent in terms of its extent all over the world, which he didn't know at the time. He was just looking at North America. But he identified these, and I've been able to track these all around the continents of the world, which nobody's ever done.
So you've got those layers there on the left, and you've got the mega sequences. And then in the middle there, I'm seeing that's like day one. That's when the rain started.
Right. That's when the fountains burst, cracked open, and the rain started for the first 40 days. There was a lot of rain the Bible talks about, but you don't see the water. Sea level didn't move up. See, the further to the left it goes, the higher sea level went. But early on, those first three mega sequences up through about what's called the Mississippian system, you don't see a lot of flooding. You just see marine fossils.
Yeah, and a lot of people think that it just rained, but the Bible in Genesis talks about the plates, the tectonic plates shifted. There was waters from the deep that came up. It would have been much more forceful. It wasn't just the rain from the sky. And a lot of people, believe that there was a firmament, and there had never been rain before Noah's time. So this is the first time they're seeing rain. Then the tectonic plates shifted. The water, exploded up. So there had to be some tidal waves. So you're seeing that in your graph here, where you're seeing those high levels of water. And then we were talking pre-show about how a lot of people just thought that there was 40 days and nights, and then Noah got out of the ark after the rain, but he literally was in the ark for a year. Is that right?
Yeah. If you add up the numbers, it's like 371 days, give or take a few days, depending on the year type of thing. But the Bible's very clear on that. It's written as a history book. It's written, Noah was 600 years old, and it talks about the second month of the year, the certain days of the year. It's very, very specific. But early on, see, this kind of graphic shows you were just flooding shallow seas, those first three sequences. And that's what the fossils reflect. All over the world, all we see early on are just marine fossils, almost exclusively. And then the Bible talks about on day 40 in Genesis 7, after day 40, the ark started to float. So now we know we're flooding land at that point. That's why I kind of put day 40 in there. Then you just have to flood these lowland areas. Maybe where the ark was at, who knows. But now you're flooding areas where many of these reptiles, like dinosaurs, lived in lowerland coastal areas. And you start to see coal seams all over the world show up suddenly. Whereas before there was almost none. There was almost no land animals at all. And so I really do think our pre-flood map is it's based on the rocks, based on the fossils, based on the real data that's there. And then eventually the water progressed higher and higher. And by the time you get to what's called the Zuni mega sequence, which are named after, these are all named after, Sloss named them all after North American tribes of people. So you wouldn't get confusing with the names. Most of the Cambrian, Ordovician, Silurian, all those names are from Europe. And so you want to make sure that they're all different names. That's where they came from. But Zuni seems to be about the high point. Once you hit the Zuni in the early Tejas, you kind of reach the peak. And we see that in the rocks. We can push a button in a computer database, and it's pretty much the maximum volume that was deposited was in the Zuni. And still today, it's the maximum extent. And that's pretty much holds true after 6 continents of data. So it's an amazing consistency that every continent shows the same pattern of a progressive flood, and progressively flooding different environments, ecological zones that biologists call them. And that's why you see the fossils change dramatically as you go up the rock record. It doesn't reflect evolution. It's the reflection of what was being buried around the world, the same environment at the same elevation. So the early world appears to have been differentiated by elevation. Different animals live at different elevations, and that's why we see those in the fossil record so dramatically. All of a sudden the dinosaurs are gone. They didn't go extinct. Their entire ecosystem was wiped out at that point because the water kept going higher.
So the secular scientists believe that this layer that everyone agrees now, I guess, exists.
Real, yeah.
There's this huge fossil layer that you just discussed that is covered, and you can see the graduation of the flood through these fossils where animals were trapped in the mud, and they continued as the flood rose. They first, like you said, the sea creatures, and then it worked up to the mammals that were on land. Now, a lot of scientists believe that all of that happened over millions of years. Is that correct? And is that a big difference?
That's what we're taught in geology class, and that's what's taught in the TV shows and movies. They believe these millions of years, but there's really no evidence for that time. especially when you look at the layers. It's like behind me here. These in the studio, there's bricks on the wall. That's what we see. Like in Grand Canyon, we see flat layers and flat layers
Yes.
and flat layers. And some of those layers, they try to claim there's 160 million years of time between the red wall and the rocks below it, and yet the rocks are perfectly flat for 277 miles as you tour Grand Canyon. And those layers, as I mentioned earlier, go all the way across the country.
Now, why is it, Dr. Tim, that we see those layers? What allows us to see those layers in the Grand Canyon and not anywhere else? Or we see them in other areas as well, but why the Grand Canyon? I know that Dr. John went to the Grand Canyon and Mount St. Helens and did a lot of research on how wood can quickly petrify, and fossils can be created quickly, like we had just talked about it. It was a year time of the flood. So tell me a little bit about that, because that's intriguing.
Well, a lot of things can happen fast. They just, people are finding more and more. You can make fossils within like 90 days. You can make oil in less than an hour from algae and things like that. There's a lot of even deposition of clay has been found to be deposited fast by moving water to get the layered clay shale layers that we see in the world today. But most of this doesn't make it into the textbooks. It's in the geological literature, it's in the research, but because it kind of goes against the standard story, not a lot of people are picking up on it. One of the most exciting things we got into is you and I are finding all these original tissues, which is why we have a guy on our staff here that's working on original studies and does research on original proteins and blood vessels and all these things we're finding in dinosaurs that are still the original material. And so how can that stuff still be original if it's hundreds of millions of years old or 68 million years old, whatever the case is? All that stuff decays away way too quickly. And there's been over
that's fascinating that they have active DNA.
And you look at Grand Canyon where John, and they actually have snippets of DNA. DNA breaks down a little quicker than some, but they've got collagen, they've got blood vessels, they've got osteocytes, which are the bone making cells. All these fine details of these cells are still all there. And they're supposed to be 68 million years old. Some of these, they found worm proteins in rocks that are over 500 million years old, according to their age dates, which they can't be. Everything keeps falling back to 4,500 years ago when the flood happened, according to the Bible. Everything we see can happen quicker if we just envision a big flood. Evolutionists believe in those 6 floods, those mega sequences. Each is a flood.
Oh, wow.
But they don't believe in one big comprehensive flood that happened quickly. That's beyond their comprehension because they're taught old, slow, what we call uniformitarianism.
Well, you believe in your findings. It's proof that the flood happened over that year period. Is there any way you can know that you can time it to 4,500 years ago?
Well, I don't know if you can time it to that, but you can put limits on it. And like a lot of this original proteins they're finding, there's limits to these things. They can't be even 1 million years old. And so everything we're finding in science, even in these adaptations animals make, they find that happens a lot quicker than they thought, within 1 generation or 2 generations. And that's why we're looking at these cave fish to see if how quickly that happens. It doesn't necessarily take a lot of time. We're taught deep time all the time. Everybody's got that pounded in their heads. And even creationists like myself, sometimes we struggle with realizing, no, this didn't take that long a time. Things can happen quick under the right conditions, just like fossils. So to make fossils, you got to bury them fast and deep. And the flood is about the only thing that allowed that to happen. We wouldn't have fossils. After the flood, there's almost no fossils that form, rather than some ice age fossils got buried in muck or froze. There's no way to make a fossil without burying them fast and deep. And so there's a lot of the evidence. I mean, it may not exactly say 4,500 years, but it does say it can't be this old. It can't be this old. It can't be this old. And most of a million years are just stripped away.
I'm dumbfounded that most, I don't know if it's most, I don't know what the percentage is exactly, but a lot of Christians they believe in the Bible, but they don't believe in a Genesis flood. It was like, let's take that out of the Bible. That didn't really happen.
And unfortunately, that holds people back sometimes. There's been a few people that have told me that was one of the problems they had, why they didn't turn to Jesus. They didn't believe, if the Bible can't get this part right, then why would I believe any of the rest of it? And
right.
So to me, it's a story, and they try to make it out to be a story that's just told because all those people back then, they were not, they were ignorant. They didn't really know. They were just, simple people. But that's not the case at all. Noah and the people, the original created Adam and Eve, probably had some of the highest IQs, and they were still perfect until they sinned, and then things started to deteriorate. And that's when we've become more. We actually have more mutations, bad random mutations, each generation that we can pass on to the next generation. And there's been studies done of the amount of mutations that humans have, and it shows that it goes back 6,000 years. And so there's some things that do point us to what we believe the creation was. They've done that with several animals. It's the same way. The rate of mutations in certain animals also show about 6,000 years. If we've been around for millions of years, we'd have mutated ourselves out of existence.
Right.
Mutations are going
right.
down. And millions of years of human fossils. Where are all these things? There's very few.
I think the same research has been done on the sun. There's no way it could be billions of years old. It would have exploded by now.
And the moon and the Earth are too close together to be 4.5 billion years old as well. They're receding from each other at a rate today that shows that if you try to move it back, a billion or 2 years, they're too close to coexist. Yeah. And so there's a lot of little things out there that and that's what Henry Morris and John Morris. Both those guys were instrumental in locating these things. That's why they studied Grand Canyon, because it's almost like God took his thumb and said, "Look what I did to expose that," knowing that we wouldn't be able to see that. And I believe it was caused by the receding water. There's canyons on every continent, major canyons like that, with the water receded away. And we don't see that. People today say Grand Canyon took 6 million years to form. Well, how come when you see the layers of Grand Canyon, and there's 160 million years of time missing here, or a million years, why aren't there huge canyons? And they're not. They're just layers that are perfectly flat on top of. The Earth does not erode things down perfectly flat.
Well, and you were talking pre-show about how also research shows that at the time of the flood, there really weren't high mountains. There really weren't, things shifted, things happened. So not only did these flood waters come out from under the deep, as the Bible says, and also the rain, there was shifting in the plates, things popped up, there were volcanoes, things exploding. It was really a traumatic event. And one of the things that I find just so interesting is that they've found fossilized clams on top of Mount Everest. How could those even exist on a top of a mountain if that mountain wasn't the same, was down at a sea level, so it is truly fascinating, all of this.
Yeah, most of the mountains of the world that we see today all formed after the flood as the waters were receding. And so that's kind of why Dr. John had a fossil of an ammonite, I believe it was, that somebody gave him from near the top of Mount Everest that hiked up there. And he was so proud of that. I don't know if Dalta still has it or not. But there is, I put that as one of my columns, was Mount Everest. It was, all the rocks in Mount Everest, but you put them all back down to where they were deposited, much, much lower than they are today. But about 80% of the world's mountains, to me, it all popped up as the waters were receding. The Rockies, the Andes, the Alps, the Himalayas, all these, not everyone, but most of them formed at the end of the flood. There's a few that formed in the flood, like the Appalachians and the Urals. But we believe there's a strong evidence of rapid plate movement, and that's another whole story we could talk about that happened during the flood year. But now, of course, the plates are moving about this much per year, not a whole lot, but that's because all the original crust has been consumed, and you have all this new hot crust, and that's what pushed the water up from below. Basically, the bottom of your bathtub went up progressively as you made more ocean crust. You progressively pushed water higher and higher, and eventually, by day 150 of the flood year, we see the evidence that that's where it flooded everything. And so there is evidence of that. People just don't choose to look for it.
Yeah, it's incredible. It really, it's so, to me, it's so fascinating. It blows my mind. I don't have a scientific mind like you do, but
I don't know if that's good or not. My wife or Nate will tell you, like, well, sometimes I have to just go, well, he's got ADHD, and that's what happens.
I think it's great. We need people like you. Oh my gosh, but it helps me. I am visual and I am creative. And so, I just, it brings to mind God's sovereignty and who he is and what he did to bring us salvation through Christ, but also just the supernatural part of all of this.
Exactly.
we're created to be who we are, but we need the sovereign God. And it's so incredible to see science back and prove that the Bible is real. Well, Dr. Tim, thank you so much today for joining us. We are already out of time.
I know. I'm sorry. I had the little glitch with my computer here. I hit the wrong button. I was trying to shut off my, so I wouldn't get any beeps from having people emailing me.
No, I hit a few bad buttons myself.
Okay. So anyway, I got it back here pretty quick with the help of my IT guy, Jonathan. So that was really helpful. But yeah, if anybody has any questions about ICR, go to icr.org and you can see our museum. You can see our Discovery Center. You can see all the research we're doing. There's much more. If you want us to come speak at your church, get a hold of us that way.
It's such a great resource, you guys. ICR.org. There's videos. There's more information. There's actually a lot of resources there. You need to take part of it. If you can't go to the museum, if you're not here in Dallas, then please go to the website because there's a lot of stuff on there. I just find it just stimulating to know that there are people like ICR working behind the scenes we don't even see, and we don't even know some of the research. So thank you, Dr. Tim.
It's a pleasure. Well, I just appreciate, what you're doing and Dr. John, he was such a good friend and colleague of mine. My next book that's coming out is going to be about dinosaurs and birds and how they're different. And I'm dedicating to Dr. John and, what a great friend he was and colleague. And the main thing about him is he was such a humble man.
He was
a humble man, but he called it, the way he saw it, and the rocks to him showed the flood. And even though he got the chance to search for, the ark many times, and I'm kind of jealous of that. I don't get to go to these continents. I have to get the data, here in the computer. But he's a great man, and I miss him a lot here in the office because I could bounce geology ideas off him. And he was one of the big, founders really of the creation geology movement. He did a lot of work with Steve Austin at Mount St. Helens, a lot of work with Steve Austin, who was the geologist before me here at ICR with John.
Yeah,
and
he was
a lot of research in Grand Canyon too. And it's just, to me, it's, these guys laid the groundwork, and now we're kind of carrying the torch to the next generation. And then we're going to have to pass that to the next generation. But
that's that legacy. I think about his father. I think about John. They're now both gone, but the legacy they left behind that you guys are building on. And what we want to do, of course, is Behind the Science is going to be a component of the series. So we want to bring Dr. Tim on, their research. And so you're watching an episode, and then you're going to see the science behind it. It's going to be an interactive component to the series. So we're very excited about that, and hopefully partnering with ICR so we can get their truth and their research out there to the masses as this series gets out. Well, Dr. Tim, thank you again. I appreciate your time today. Thanks so much. And we really appreciate everything you're doing. Keep up the good work.
Well, it's like I said, I used to tell Dr. John, it's your fault that I'm here. It's the greatest job I've ever had. I mean, it's the greatest time working at ICR is the greatest job, greatest research I've ever done. And so I can see God had a plan, teaching me how to use oil and gas data by working for the oil and gas company. But then, he had a tendency to kind of throw me over the side like Jonah to get me to move on to get a PhD. Get a PhD is what got me here at ICR. And so there's twists and turns that God has in our lives, but in the end, he has a plan for all of us. And really that ICR's main goal is, to edify the church, but we want to point people to Jesus. So Jesus. And that's what it's all about.
I think that science is pointing people to Christ, and it's delivering so much information that's needed in a very skeptical world. So thank you for that. Thank you for your work. Well, Dr. Tim, again, thanks. And I'm going to close us out here. We have a minute left, so I'm going to just real quickly tell you who won the Swimma Hour of Power, or Power Hour, I think it's called. Let me find that name. We did a drawing before the show today, and we gave away $100 worth in free Struck gear, and that winner is Charity Olson. So Charity will be sending an email out to you, so you know exactly how to get in touch with us so you can get your free gear. And if not, if you guys want to purchase the gear, please go to strucktheseries.com, click on gear, and you can purchase that gear there, any kind of merchandise. It helps us get this series started. So thank you so much for joining today. We really appreciate you guys. And until next time, make sure you follow and share and let people know about this incredible project we're doing. Please share this video. Let people know that there's proof in a global flood. We appreciate you guys. Blessings. We'll talk to you soon.